we're driving south this afternoon from the Ann Arbor area in Michigan on US 23 down towards Toledo. We had one or two things done to our car at the Toledo Service Center, our Tesla Model S. And they gave us a loaner, and we are driving back down there in the loaner to pick up our car. And this is an interesting car. It's a model, it's called the P100D. And the way the Tesla numbers work, the P, in terms of Model S's, stands for performance version. 100 means it's got a 100 kilowatt hour battery. And then D means it has all-wheel drive. The D actual stands for dual motor, meaning a motor in the front and a motor in the back to drive the front axle or the front wheels and the rear wheels. If it was a non-performance version, it would just be called the 100D. And if it was the two-wheel drive, meaning rear-wheel drive version, it would just be called the 100. But I think everything starting around 2017 or 2018 was all-wheel drive because of the fact that it gave you so much extra range. Correct me if I'm wrong. At some point, they just decided, the hell with it, we're not going to bother making a rear wheel and an all-wheel drive version. Every Tesla is going to be all-wheel drive, at least in terms of the Model S, for the sake of simplicity. And again, for the sake of range, because that front motor in the newer Model S's, starting with, I think it's called the Raven Powertrain, which came out around 2018. That is the motor from the Model 3, and it's got a permanent magnet motor as opposed to an induction motor, and it's a decent amount more efficient. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. One or the other has better performance, and then the other one has better efficiency when it comes to, when it comes to your use of electricity. Now, there's a difference in this one and the one we own. This Model S has something called AP2, which is AutoPilot version 2. And if you see the little roadway there, it's a little more detailed. It's actually a lot more detailed than the one in our car. It's got a left lane and a right lane. It's got a little divider between the two. The car has cameras all around it. Not just above the rear view mirror, but in the left and right front fenders and in the left and right B pillars, meaning the roof supports behind the front doors. And I'm sure there are other locations as well. They've also just announced that they are now shipping cars without radar or LiDAR of any kind because they are so confident in the ability of the cameras to detect all the information and take all the imagery and process it as fast as they need to in order to support fully autonomous driving. And that's kind of a big deal because practically every other car company on the planet uses a combination of cameras and radar or LiDAR to do vehicle recognition and distance measurement and things like that. And so it was a big announcement Tesla made just the other day, sometime around the 15th, 16th, 18th of May. And not only are they switching to that, to all visual, 100% visual, but they are actually shipping cars as we speak that use nothing but cameras, visual sensors, to run the AutoPilot system. So AP2 is interesting in a couple ways. The first, again, is that it's got a little more detailed of a picture on the screen. It also lets you do things like navigate on AutoPilot, and we've got that activated now, if you see that. And that will actually make your turns for you. That will choose what lane it thinks you should be, and that will take your on and off ramps I think it'll stop at stoplights and stop signs and things like that. We'll find out here soon once we get off the highway. But we just decided to activate it for this trip down to Toledo to see how it would work. We've heard a number of people complain about AP2. Again, AutoPilot version 2. And this is actually 2.5. We checked the stats. And some people think it's a little bit too nervous on the highway and it makes too many adjustments to your direction, and it's always sort of, doing that type of thing with the steering wheel. We haven't noticed that. The other thing some people say is that it does phantom braking. Like you're just driving down the highway, no obstructions, no vehicles around you, and it just slams on the brakes out of nowhere. And this one has not done that either. What we have noticed is that it seems to be a little bit better at reading the road surface and identifying lane dividers and the edges of the road, even in conditions where they're not very well marked. And we live in southeast Michigan, where a lot of the roads are in terrible shape, very, very, very badly marked, and the lane dividers are fading and so on and so forth. And this thing seems just a little bit better, again with AutoPilot version 2.5, than the one we have, which is AutoPilot version 1. We don't mind it in the least. There's nothing wrong with the AP1. It's 1,000 times better than having nothing. And it will do most of the driving for you once you get on the highway. But AP 2.5, this being our first experience with it, it works just fine. And there are a number of occasions where it works better than AP1. It's making very, very subtle, very smooth adjustments to traffic ahead of it, behind it, to the sides. We haven't seen it do it quite yet. It did it once earlier when we were in the slow lane and there was a lot of traffic, and it actually notified us that it was about to change lanes, and it changed lanes for us. They wanted us to confirm. We had to hit the cruise control stalk to confirm or acknowledge that it was going to change lanes, but it did it. It got into the passing lane for a while, and then it said, hey, I need to jump out of the passing lane. It gave a little announcement, somewhere around there. And it got back into the right lane, and then it actually took an off-ramp maybe 15 minutes ago and got off the highway and then got onto another one. It got off of Interstate 94, got onto this one, which is US 23, which is basically an interstate, effectively. It still gives you that little warning that you just saw a second ago. It wants you to shake the steering wheel every now and then if it doesn't know that you're paying attention, if you haven't made any inputs lately. All the lane changes you've seen me do here are initiated by the driver. And all I do is I just turn on the turn signal, hit the blinker, and it changes lanes. Done a lot of driving in our Model S over the last 2 years. We've had it since April of 2019, and we put just under 50,000 miles on it in 2 years. We've also been driving a number of other vehicles. We've got our Ram 3500, we've got our Silverado 3500 with the Duramax. We've got our new 2021 F-150 that we put just over 8,000 miles on in about 6 or 7 weeks of driving it. And we've got that out on the West Coast right now. It's kind of our West Coast vehicle for getting around and moving cargo and freight and stuff. Our Tesla stays in the Midwest because after doing a couple of long trips in the last year or two with it, with the 2016 Model S with the 85 kilowatt hour battery, it's just not that pleasant taking 500 or 1,000 or 2,000 mile road trips with it. The battery only gets you about 150, 175 miles of range on the highway before you have to stop and pull over and hit one of the Tesla chargers, superchargers. And they have slowed down the charging on the older cars because I guess they don't want to kill the batteries. On the newer ones, it's not a problem. On the anything I think starting in 2018, at least in the Model S and the Model X, could charge up to 250 kilowatts, which is exceptionally fast. This one here will go up to about 125. Ours will go up to maybe 75 or 80 kilowatts. And so for a trip that's, cross country from here to Las Vegas or from here to San Diego, that's a 2,000 plus mile trip. And we did it once last year during the pandemic. In some ways it was great because, first of all, the car was driving itself, and there's nothing not to like about that. There was basically no traffic because it was the pandemic, and in a place like Nebraska, it was straight and flat for 400 miles, and there were no state troopers. They were setting all kinds of new records for the Cannonball, the cross-country drive, I think from New York to LA. Because again, the first couple months of the pandemic, the police were nowhere to be found. They had a lot of bigger and better things to do than worry about people on the highway. There weren't even many people on the highway to begin with, so there wasn't much of a need to patrol it. But again, with that older Tesla that we have, the 5-year-old Tesla, we're not really planning on doing any more cross-country driving with it. Not since they slowed down the charging on the older batteries. Alright, so you see here, it says that there is a turn coming up in 0.4 miles. And let's see what it does. It's showing no signs of slowing down. Oh, wait a second. Look at that, it just got us onto the off-ramp. And it's slowing us down. Unreal. It actually put the blinker on, put us onto the off-ramp, and is slowing down to a stop. We'll see what happens next. We got a stop sign up ahead with a vehicle stopped at it, and we got a left turn to make. Okay, it stopped. We got traffic coming on the right and on the left. And again on the right. Okay, what you might not have been able to see on the screen is that it said AutoPilot navigation complete. Press accelerator to resume. So it actually stopped the car, and it had us take over. I guess it wasn't super confident about that turn. But now it's got us navigating again on autopilot, so let's see what happens. It was a little peculiar that it put us on that off-ramp at 80 miles an hour. It didn't slow down in the least before it just made that turn real suddenly. So, word of the wise, if you've got a Tesla, the navigating on autopilot can make some turns that might surprise you or startle you if you're not prepared for them. I mean, the good news is that you won't forget to make your turn ever. But, and we were expecting it, but that was still kind of abrupt. And so here's one annoying thing about autopilot. You see how it says 35 max there on the left? That's because on the right, what you see is that it's detected a speed limit sign that's a 35 mile an hour speed limit. And so we can manually raise it up to 40 as the max speed, but autopilot will not drive itself faster than that. And so it's a little bit obsessive about trying to stay more or less within the limits of the speed limit. And that's because, there's been a lot of bad press about autopilot. And just a day or two ago, there was a headline that said, another Tesla on autopilot slams into a I think it was a police car, actually. And so they're just trying to do what they can to avoid as much unnecessary bad press caused by people doing really stupid and irresponsible things with their cars. You know, unfortunately, it's the United States, and, you know, greatest country in the history of the planet. But we got some of the dumbest drivers in the history of the planet, too, who will not take responsibility for their actions and get behind the wheel and act like an idiot. And then somebody else pays the price. What are you going to do? Now, Ford, on the other hand, which was very surprising when we discovered it, the F-150 with adaptive cruise control and lane centering and lane keeping, which is Ford's roughly similar version to AutoPilot version 1. Soon to be augmented with what they call Blue Cruise on certain stretches of interstate highways. That will let you set any speed you want on the cruise control, regardless of what the speed limit is. And if you see what I'm doing here, I've got my foot on the gas and I'm taking it to speeds above what AutoPilot will do. AutoPilot will go as fast as 40. You can get into the throttle and take it above 40. But if you get to 90, or actually 91 or above, AutoPilot will cut out and not re-engage until you stop and put the car into park, which is their way of punishing you. All right, now check this out. We're coming up to a stop sign. We've got traffic ahead of us. And unlike the Ford, the Tesla is very, very good about slowing itself down and keeping a comfortable distance between itself and the vehicle ahead of it. All right. So I had to get on the brake just now, because I guess it wasn't going to stop for that stop sign. Surprisingly, not sure what that's about. Okay, and now the car saw a speed limit sign that was 45, and so it will AutoPilot will go as high as 50. And then if you want to go faster than 50, you got to do it yourself. Although, once again, you better not take it above 90 or AutoPilot will disengage and it won't turn back on until you stop and put it in park. It's that time of year when you're seeing all kinds of farm equipment on the road. Our in-laws live just outside Lansing. And again, people just do not pay attention. And it's unfortunate, but there are a lot of people that hit those large agricultural tractors and combines and obviously harvesters in the fall. And I think a year ago, some driver that wasn't paying attention drove into a harvester on our in-laws' property. Well, on the road in front of our in-laws' property at full cruising speed, killed at least one or maybe two of the people in the car. And there was no doubt about it. It wasn't even open to interpretation. They just weren't paying attention. Or maybe even been drunk driving. And they barreled straight into that harvester, and that was the end of them. But the farmer who works that land for our in-laws ended up settling with them, or their insurance company did, because they just didn't want it to turn into some kind of ridiculous lawsuit. All right, we got a stop sign here. And I'm not sure what that's quite about, but the car does not seem to be able to stop for stop signs, even with AutoPilot and navigate on AutoPilot engaged. So there you go. And that's why we always say, you know, let the buyer beware, or let the driver beware. No matter how good the system is that's doing your driver augmentation and assistance, you really need to keep your damn hand on the wheel and watch the road, because you do not want to trust your life and the lives of your passengers, family members, to some technological system that may or may not work when you need it most. All right, well, I think that's it for this video. Again, we're driving with AP2.5, AutoPilot version 2.5 in a Model S Tesla, and it's got some neat features. It's not a reason by itself to buy this car. If you've got a Tesla with AutoPilot version 1, or if you've got a Ford with the lane keeping and lane centering and adaptive cruise control, either one of those are just fine, and you don't need to do backflips to get the newest and greatest version of driver assistance, because to be honest, this thing, it's newer and it's more modern and a little bit better than AutoPilot version 1, but it's not some kind of quantum leap, not some kind of generational, magical improvement. It's just a little bit better. And so, on the other hand, if you don't have a car with any kind of driver assistance or augmentation, yeah, you ought to get something. And if you're looking at a Tesla, there's no reason not to get the newest and greatest, except for the fact that it costs so much more. The older ones cost a hell of a lot less. And again, starting I think in 2015 or maybe 2014, I think I saw some 2014s the other day that had AutoPilot on them. There's nothing wrong with getting a 2014 Tesla. It's a perfectly fine car. The only problem, again, with the older ones, before they had the 100 kilowatt hour battery like this one does, is that the older ones with the 85 or the 90, and definitely the 70 and the 60 kilowatt hour battery, those things have very, very limited range, meaning less than 300, sometimes less than 250 mile max range. And when you want to talk about range, always keep in mind that you're supposed to use not the full 100 to 0 range. You're only supposed to use the 20 to 80% range to preserve the health of your battery. So if you got a car with 300 mile range like that new F-150 Lightning, what that really means is that your daily useful range is only, again, not between 100 and 0, but between 80 and 20. So you're only going to use the middle 60% of your range. So for a so-called 300 mile range vehicle, you're only using 180 miles. And that's not that far, at least if you drive as much as we do. And so our 2016 Model S with the 85 kilowatt hour battery has a rated 260, but in the real world that means about 150 or 175, or about 75 to 85 out and 75 to 85 miles back if you're talking about a round trip. And that's not that far when you live in the Midwest or the Southwest or anywhere outside the Northeast or some big city metro area, Chicago or Denver, LA, that kind of thing. If all you ever do is drive to and from the office every day, and then to and from Home Depot and Costco in the weekend, a car or a SUV or an electric pickup with a so-called range of 300 miles or 250 will do you just fine. But if you drive tens of thousands of miles a year, as we do, no, you need a car with much, much more range. More like 400, which is what I think the Long Range Plus Tesla had in 2020, last year. which has since been replaced by something called the Plaid model for 2021, which may or may not start shipping sometime soon. We'll see. Anyway, I think that's it for now. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon, and we will talk to you later.